Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Paola. Today, we have a very, very special guest, first time on the channel, but longtime author, Gloria Chao. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
X marks the spot. It's one of those books that just took me by surprise because, like, you read the synopsis and you're like, great, YA, romance, Taiwan, perfect. And then you read the book and it's like, oh my God, this is just so much more than one could expect. I love that there's themes of family and generational trauma, heritage, and also the very obvious, very necessary teen angst. So, how do you take on all of these topics in such a specific story like Gemma's?
Thank you for saying that, first of all. That means a lot. And you're right. So this book definitely had a lot of pieces going on in it, more so than a lot of my other books. So first of all, there's the romance. We have the treasure hunt. There's this summer program, which is how Gemma and Xander, the main characters, get to Taiwan. And with that, there's this big, fun cast to play with. And so on top of all of those pieces, Gemma is also trying to learn about her family, her roots. There are all these family secrets coming out, and she's also being forced to work with her ex, Xander, who has become her bitter rival, but now he's actually the key to solving this treasure hunt. And the treasure hunt is so important to her, and so she really has to kind of make peace with him, even though she really doesn't want to. And so there were a lot of pieces to balance, and I think that made it both harder and easier to write in some ways. So the more difficult part is I really had to outline this one very well. I
Mm.
had to have the puzzles planned out. I had to figure out how to balance everything because I also knew I wanted the treasure hunt and the program to have effects on each other. While it was harder, making sure I had everything planned out, once it was planned out, in some ways it actually
Mm.
felt a little bit easier to write because I had a much more just thought out plan going into it than I usually do for writing.
The puzzles are just so clever. I always tell this to anyone who writes something that I am super unfamiliar with that I'm just like, yeah, totally. That sounds correct. But this one is just so intricate. Like there's explanations and then I love Sanders' understanding of the language and how he helps Gemma understand it as well. And it's just such a lovely mix of the language, the culture, and why Sander is needed specifically. I love that so much. So, why a treasure hunt and why one made of puzzles and puns?
That means a lot just because that was such a big part of it and it was hard to plan. So I'm glad to hear that it worked for you. This book really started with the treasure hunt. So I knew going in, I wanted to write a book about a treasure hunt. Part of it is just because I've always loved them. As a kid, I would make them for my families. They were terrible. Like the clues would be like, hey, go to the kitchen. And then there'd be another clue there. I promise this book has much more intricate puzzles. And when I went into writing them, I had a few things I wanted to do, and it did feel a little daunting at first, but I wanted it to be puzzles that the reader could try to solve if they wanted to.
Mm.
I wanted there to be messages for Gemma and for the reader, and I wanted there to be an overall theme to the whole hunt, and I wanted the treasure hunt and the summer program to influence each other. And so it felt a little daunting, but I had all these pieces I was working with, and so, determining one kind of helped me work out some of the other ones. And it ended up being so much fun to do just because it was a fun way to present information to the reader. And I knew from the beginning I wanted Gemma to not speak the language, but Xander to be able to, because some of the puzzles are in both Mandarin and English. And I wanted readers who don't know anything about the language to also be able to understand it through Gemma's eyes. And I knew I wanted her to be the window in.
I love that through that we also get to know Gemma's grandpa's sense of humor. He's easily my favorite character. I love that we don't actually meet him, but we
Mhm.
do get to know him via these puzzles and the reveals that come with the puzzles. So, can you talk a little bit about creating him as someone who we never get to meet?
Yes, this was the first time I did that, and I knew from the beginning that the grandfather character would be so important
Mhm.
because he needs a reason for creating this puzzle for Gemma. And Gemma's on this hunt because she wants to learn more about her family. It's not just about the inheritance that she thinks is at the end. And so from the beginning, I worked very hard to figure out what the grandfather's story is, his motivations, And I needed to figure out how to show all these things through the puzzles. And so in some ways it helped me determine, what the point of some of these puzzles would be, which was easier to kind of work backwards from that. And I wanted these to not just reveal about his character, but just, his whole history. And it's just a way of exploring this idea that some people have a hard time telling their story to
Yeah.
other people, especially to people they love, their family. And especially if it's a very tough story to tell. And so I just pictured this character who really wanted his family to understand him, but he just didn't know how to tell them. And that's partly inspired by some of my experiences with family, where sometimes it's just really hard. And I thought, what a wonderful way for this person to show this other side of him, to show his story than with puzzles. I mean, what's more, whimsical and fun than that? And it really helps Gemma kind of see this side that even her mom didn't see in the grandfather growing up.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I noticed that too. I live with my grandparents. I'm like their primary caretaker. I'm mostly like the errands girl, but my relationship with them is so different than it is with my mom and my mom's relationship to them. When I was reading X Marks the Spot, I was constantly thinking about how interesting and how different it is from grandpa to mom to
Mhm.
daughter. And again, with this very specific situation that Gemma is going through, I just really, really loved how it was explored. And I loved seeing how angry Gemma was, but how much the mom understood how mad she was, but she was also like, but please understand why I did this. It was beautiful. So can you talk a little bit about that relationship, that mother-daughter relationship?
So, with both Gemma's mom and her grandfather, I set out wanting to capture this coming of age moment that we go through, and everyone goes through it at different points in their life. But it's when you see your parents and your grandparents as humans for the first time. Because as a kid, you see them a certain way. And I do think there's this eye-opening moment when you realize, oh, wow, they have lives, they have these backgrounds. And part of realizing that is also realizing, oh, they made a lot of mistakes.
Hmm.
And a lot of times those mistakes have to do with you, which makes sense. And I wanted to explore, how do you get over something like that? And so that especially came up with Gemma and her mom because there are a lot of things that Gemma's mom kept from her that she thought she was doing to protect Gemma. And then Gemma had to kind of realize, yes, it was terrible and I am angry and to communicate that, but also to figure out how to move forward because she doesn't want to just, cut off the relationship. But, it's this very tough thing that you have to work through together. And that was another big part of it that I wanted to explore, just this idea that it can be hard. It doesn't necessarily take away from their love. It doesn't mean that they had bad motivations, but it is a complicated gray area, and she's allowed to feel the way that she feels. And another tough thing she had to learn is that you can't choose your family.
Hmm.
So at the start of this book, she really wants a bigger family, and now, oh, she's finally starting to get it. This grandfather came out of the woodwork, but then he passed away, and so she has to deal with that. She's not going to get to meet him, but she's trying to get to know him through this journey. But there are very tough spots on this path where she stops and starts to ask herself, do I want to know more?
Yeah.
And that is a difficult question. And just her coming to terms with this, I wanted more family, but I don't get to choose who that is.
Especially
Hmm.
with grandparents, I think it can be really easy to idealize them or romanticize them and
Yes.
see them in a very specific
Yes.
way. And then when you see them as they are, you're like, oh shit, like, what does this mean?
And you almost can't reconcile the two, right? It's so hard to piece them together. It's like they don't go together and you don't know what to do about that.
So moving on to a lighter topic. So there's so much food and folklore in X Marks the Spot. And again, I just feel like I very rarely read these books where you just feel like you're right next to the characters. So was there any like landmark or fairy tale or dish that you wanted to add but you couldn't?
I was lucky in that I managed to get all the things that I set out to get in the book
Yay.
in there. So that was very difficult. I wasn't sure I'd be able to. I had a long list of all the sites of all the foods. This was hard to write because I was so hungry while I was writing it and describing all the foods. I was looking up, descriptions that I ordered so much Chinese food. Luckily, I'm close to a Chinatown that I could get a lot of the foods
Nice.
I was writing about. It's too hard to cook. I'm not a very good cook, so that I couldn't make it myself. And with the locations, I was so nostalgic. I was pulling up old family photos of when we went there, which was just so much fun. And I was just going back through all these adventures that I had with my family, which was why I wanted to write a book set in Taiwan. I think there were only a couple that now in retrospect, a couple dishes where I'm like, oh, that would have been fun to put in, but
Mm.
it hadn't made my list because I tried to stick to kind of the classic dishes that people who had gone there would remember. But there is one of my favorite meals that I had in Taiwan. I can't even remember the name now. My parents know it, but they had a soup dumpling with truffle on the skin.
Ooh.
And that was one of the best things I've ever had. And maybe I should have tried to get that in there. And then there's a snack that I really love that my parents always send to me when they go visit. Actually, it's on the way. I have a package on the way here now, which has these crackers, so I'm excited. But it's a nougat in between scallion crackers, and I don't know how common it is, but it's something my parents always love, and when they go back, they get it. But it's just one of those things that every time they go, it's at the top of my request list. Like, please get me a box of these.
Yeah, I can totally relate to being hungry because as I read the food passages, I was just like, oh my God, all of these sounds delicious. I need to try them all. This next part is the rapid fire section.
Okay.
So, are you a plotter or a pantser?
I'm in between. So I think it depends on the book and it's also changed through my career. So when I started, I was much more of a pantser and then I've
Mm.
started plotting more. And then as I mentioned, for this book, I really had to outline it. It was the most intense outline I've had. And then I've recently begun writing mystery. And
Hmm.
then for that, also, you have to really outline a lot of things and know when you're going to plant what and when you're going to introduce certain characters. And so I think I'm moving more toward plotting.
Paperback or hardback?
I love both for different reasons. I think for reading, I like paperback just because it's easier to throw in your bag, and
Mm.
but then I don't like, when they get bent. I'm the person who likes to keep all my books really nice to the point that I fold these corner bookmarks so I don't, ruin the spine with regular bookmarks. But if I had to choose one, I'll go with paperback.
A book you want everyone to read.
If you're a writer, I think this is a book that every writer should read. It's called Story Genius by Lisa Cron, and she talks about how to write your characters and figure out their motivations and how they transform through the book. And that has really changed how I think about my books. And every time I am coming up with a new book, I will start there. I start with my characters, and I think that's a great book for anyone who's either starting to write or has written books and just wants another craft book to kind of think about their characters in a new way.
That's so interesting. Nobody's ever recommended a craft book.
Too hard
Oh,
to recommend a book for everybody. Sorry, I know you said
yeah.
rapid fire.
No, that's okay.
I
That's
think
okay.
it's hard to recommend a book for everyone because I'm such a mood reader and I'm a little bit picky, and what works for other people doesn't always work for me. And I think for a long time, because of that, I didn't think of myself as a reader because I was like, oh, there are only certain books that I love. But
Hmm.
when I love a book, I'll sit down and I'll read it in a day and I'll talk, I'll keep thinking about it. And so I think the idea that there's a book that everybody would love, I find that hard to be able to think
Oh,
of one to recommend.
do you think books should be judged by their covers?
I want to say no because the authors usually are not as involved. It's a totally different department. A lot of times it's an expertise that just writers aren't necessarily familiar with. And a lot of times it's about trends and what's selling now. And I just feel like the cover doesn't always reflect what's on the inside. And I think it would be a shame to miss a book that you could fall in love with just because maybe you didn't like the cover. So I do think covers can help people pick up books and realize, oh, I might love this, and I think that's great. And I'm so lucky. I love all of my covers, but I feel like you shouldn't discount a book just because you don't like it.
And finally, what's your purpose in life?
Well, that's a heavy question. I'm gonna relate this back to writing again. So my purpose with my writing life and writing books is I really hope to entertain readers. I hope maybe I make you laugh and maybe give you a new perspective on some part of your life. And overall, I just want to bring a little bit of hope and joy to other people and maybe help them feel a little less alone.
I love that. So let's talk about the romance because I loved Gemma's banter with Sander. I love that she talks about her hate goggles because I never saw
Yep,
anything like
instead of love
describe
goggles,
it.
we have
Yes,
hate goggles.
I loved it so, so much. So can you talk a little bit about writing them as individuals and then as a couple?
This was a part that did take me a few revisions to get right. And I think part of it is because enemies to lovers is a very fine line to toe. And this was the first time I've written it. All my previous books had very sweet, childhood friends to lovers or friends to lovers, or, they meet on the page and they, clearly have something going for them. And this was the first time I had to balance this. Yes, they don't get along, but also it can't be so bad that you don't understand why, maybe they can make it work later. And it wasn't until I figured out their characters as individuals that it really just everything came together. So Gemma has had a very tough life. She takes things very seriously because she wants a better life for her and her mom. And so she wants to do well in school. And a lot of this is just about how fast she had to grow up. But she also hides that side from other people because it's just something she feels like it's not anyone else's business. And so Xander didn't know this about her. And Xander is kind of the opposite. He's the popular kid. He's cool without trying. He cares so much about having fun, and everything just seems effortless for him. He's smart and he does well in school, but he doesn't seem to care. And so they obviously butt heads, and they had to work on a ninth grade science project together. That was kind of the big blow up for them because, as you can imagine, these two attitudes really is hard for, having the same goal for this project. And this was so much fun to play with during the trip, just because, it comes to a head in all of these situations, especially when you're on a treasure hunt. And I feel like a perfect example of this is one of my favorite scenes, which is where they're at the National Palace Museum and there's an art heist where Gemma is like, no, I'm sure. We just have to peek under the frame and the clue will be, underneath. And Xander's like, no, we have to steal the painting. And as you can imagine, that leads to a whole slew of things. And, there's alarms blaring, and, Gemma's mad at Xander, and Xander's like, no, we have to do all these things. And so it was just so much fun to play with these personalities. And I also wanted to capture that kind of coming of age moment when you also see other people in a new light, not just your parents and your grandparents. And this happens with them, where the treasure hunt brings them together. And it's also in this new perspective that it helps them see why the other person is the way that they are. And maybe it's not as black as white as they originally thought when they were younger, when they, didn't have as much of a worldview. And so once they start kind of changing their view of the other person, then that kind of can pave the way for them to maybe come back together.
Again, I just really love the description of the hate goggles. What do you think like Sander has for Gemma, if not hate goggles?
I think Xander has always kind of had lingering feelings there for her, and he's kind of always seen her in a different light. He's the one who's always been trying to, make it a friendship, and Gemma's the one in her head who has seen him more as a rival. And that'll come out later where Gemma has seen him a certain way, and she'll say something like, "When did you become nice?" And he's like, "I've
Yeah.
always been nice." And so I think that just emphasizes how much the hate goggles have skewed Gemma's view of him. Where, I mean, I think we've all experienced this where, something happens and it really just tints how you see someone and you just miss things.
Yeah.
And it can be both in a positive and negative light that this goes. And for Gemma, it really went in a negative way.
Your next book is called The Ex-Girlfriend Murder Club, and it's a mystery. So, what's it like transitioning from romance to mystery?
It was a big change. There is still a small romance in the mystery, but obviously that takes a back seat. And I think the hardest thing was when I realized that I can never read a draft of my book without knowing who did it. And even with romance, obviously you know things, but it's easier to, put it aside and come back and kind of have fresh eyes when you're reading it and be able to almost put yourself in the shoes of the reader. But I feel like with the mystery, you just can never, you're always thinking about it in a different way. You'll never know what it's like to read it without knowing these things. And so because of that, I panicked a little and I enlisted so many beta readers and I asked them for very specific things. When you're reading, can you at certain points tell me certain things? And so that helped me at least get a sense of what they were thinking throughout. And I think what I realized at the end of that was that everyone reads it so differently that I don't need to panic so much because you're never going to be able to know what every single person is thinking, which is, I think, is a good way to think of most of your books. I think if you get too caught up in what other people will think, it can kind of give you writer's block and make you
Yeah.
pause. And so I think that was a good exercise for me in realizing, okay, I'll do the best that I can and try to plant it so and try to take a step back and see what it's like for the reader. But, I'll never be able to know, just like with my other books, but I also don't have to be so worried about it.
Is there anything else you want to talk about? Anything else you want to plug?
Yeah, so I recently announced that there's going to be a sequel to the Ex-Girlfriend Murder Club, which I'm very excited about. So
Yes.
I loved being in that world, and so it was so fun to get to come back. It's my first sequel, so it was fun getting to write characters that I already felt like I knew, and it felt easier to get into it because of that. It did present other new challenges as well, which has been fun to work through. And I love that with the mystery, you can write multiple books because you give them a new mystery to solve. And
Yes.
I had a fun idea for this week's sequel to this one. The Ex-Girlfriend Murder Club is going to be out this June, June 24th, 2025. And then the sequel should be out June 2026. And I just wanted to say thank you for having me. You can find me at mywell.wordpress.com. And I'm on social media at Gloria C. Chao. And I love to hear from readers. So thank you so much.
Just like from the bottom of my heart, thank you for writing X Marks the Spot. It really like made so much sense to me. It's a book that I just hold really, really close to me now. I loved it so much. I hope to see many, many more readers reaching out to it and finding what I found in it. So everyone else, please remember to check out X Marks the Spot and later this year the Ex-Girlfriend Murder Club. I will leave links down below so that you can check them out. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.